Okay, let's travel through the book a little bit. Now, as a reader, I was intrigued by how you started. You laid the foundation of Usman Danfodio's jihad, in northern Nigeria, and how that sort of laid the foundation for a lot of things that happened many years after. The culture of Islam that became established in northern Nigeria before the colonial masters came. And then when the colonial masters came, how they had to grapple with that and eventually settled on the indirect rule system, to use that as a leverage for ruling northern Nigeria and subsequently the whole of Nigeria. So let's do it. Let's travel through that a little bit, just briefly. Can you explain that a bit more?
Obviously, Kunle, you read the book very carefully, and I appreciate that. I would really, I think central to the argument of the book is the Sokoto Jihad, the Jihad of Usman Danfodio. But to be sure, we have to start even before the Jihad of Usman Danfodio. We have to start with the basic understanding that northern Nigeria is very much part of the Sahel with its connection to the Maghreb over many, many centuries. So northern Nigeria is very much, in so many ways, the land of Muslims, one can argue.
The land of
Muslims, at least perceived
so
to
there was
be.
a lot of Islam.
At least perceived to be the land of Muslims. So Islam did not start in northern Nigeria with the jihad of Usman Danfodio, 1804 to 1808. So the success of the jihad in itself was grafted on ideas and logic of Islam as part of Hausa Fulani culture, going back many centuries. So we want to see the jihad of Usman Danfodio as fundamentally reformist, establishing a political structure, a theocracy, a theocratic confederacy, if you will. That in itself is transformative, by and large. And as you rightly mentioned in your question, the social foundation of the jihad of Usman Danfodio went a long way in providing a sociological and political basis on which the British will ultimately establish the indirect rule system. So that's extremely important. What you did not mention, however, is the role of Christianity. Oftentimes when people engage in the study, as the religious scholars engage, they tend to study the world religions separately, Christianity and Islam separately. And those who study indigenous religion separately. In this particular project, I brought all the three together because I think they're really very important. And I do this not as a student or a scholar of religion, but rather as a student and a scholar of politics and history. So the question here is not just simply the jihad of Usman Danfodio, it's also the coming of Christian evangelization. About the mid-19th century, as I documented quite extensively in the book, the Church Missionary Society started about the turn of the 19th century. The role of the Saro coming from Freetown, Sierra Leone is extremely important. We need to understand the transformative impact of mission Christianity as foundational from Atlantic Yoruba communities in places like Lagos, Abeokuta, Badagry, moving southwards to other parts of the country, to what is today's middle belt of Nigeria, southeast Nigeria, and central Nigeria, and even moving to the core north of Nigeria. The basic argument here is that those two world religions, before the imposition of British colonialism, were already well established in Nigeria. They were already shaping the character, the composition, the nature of the country in profound ways.
Are you saying, or were you trying to say in your book, that that religious political structure that was laid back then determined almost every major political flashpoint that happened in our history up till now? I mean, you tied it to the Sharia in 1999, you tied it to the Biafra War, you tied it to the first, second coups, you tied it to the results of the elections of the Second Republic, of the Third Republic, of the Fourth Republic. I just saw that trend right through your book. Are you saying that the influence or the role of those major religions have determined almost every major flashpoint we've ever had in Nigeria? Political flashpoint.
You got the argument very well. I mean, you said it very well. But it's not just simply my argument. To be perfectly honest, as you would probably attest, this is a thoroughly, rigorously researched book with extensive archival and primary resources. So this is not what I am saying. This is essentially what the evidence is telling me. The evidence is compelling. And that actually surprised me, that we cannot imagine any major areas of tension, confrontation, and possible areas of reconciliation, I hope, and accommodation. I'm hoping we'll get to say a few things about that later, without seeing this constant reverberations. So in a way, it's a constant manifestation of the past in the present. So the examples you gave are really very important examples. The crisis of Sharia, not one, but multiple crises of Sharia, is manifested in this reverberation of history as a structural problem. Various elements of Christian, so-called Christian-Muslim antagonism, conflicts, and violence in northern Nigeria and central Nigeria, manifestations of this. The extent to which there's always that perception that you have to defend the land of Muslims against intruders in major flashpoints are also an aspect of this. I think it's really very important to recognize that northern Nigerians are generally accommodating and welcoming to non-Muslims. After all, we have so many non-Muslim settlers in northern Nigeria. But in major areas of political contestations, political contestations.
Political being the key word here.
Yeah, being the key one, you see these flashpoints. You gave the example of the Nigerian Biafra War. Igbos, southern Nigerians, and south-south Nigerians have been living in northern Nigeria for at least a generation, since the amalgamation of Nigeria, of southern and northern Nigeria in 1914. There had never been an incident of religious violence against Southerners and Christians. But as a consequence of the Major's coup of January 1966, and all the events that happened within a 6-7 month period, we saw how systematic attacks were carried out against not just simply Igbo citizens, but also other Southerners, Southern Christians. So in a way, we oftentimes look at that problem essentially as an ethnic or regional problem. But it does have a very serious religious dimension to it.